The sun had just begun its slow crawl over the jagged horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. A dry wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and the faint echo of hooves in the distance. Somewhere out there, danger waited, not just in the form of rival men or the unforgiving land, but in the tangled web of choices and loyalties that bound hearts and fates together. He stood at the edge of the canyon, the shadow of the rocky cliff stretching long over his worn boots. The Apache's eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned the horizon with a vigilance born from years of knowing the land better than any map or trail could tell. His hand hovered over the hilt of a weathered knife, not out of fear, but as a silent promise to protect, to survive, and to claim what he believed could not be taken from him by the world door, by her. She appeared then, framed by the morning light, a figure caught between fragility and fire. Her dress, simple but marked with the careful attention of someone who understood the hard lines of frontier life, shifted in the breeze. The long journey to this canyon, through plains, rivers, and desert ridges, had left her tired but resolute. Every step she took seemed measured, almost cautious, as if she carried not only her own life but the weight of decisions that could shatter everything around her. "Say you are mine," the Apache whispered, his voice low, steady, a vibration that seemed to belong to the land itself. There was no anger in it, no command, just the raw, unspoken intensity of a man whose heart had already pledged more than words could capture. The words hung between them, fragile yet heavy, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes met his, a flash of fear and defiance dancing in the golden morning light. The choice he asked for was simple in words, but impossible in consequence. To say those words was to bind herself to a life that could be as dangerous as it was passionate. To step into a world where alliances were tested with blood and survival was never guaranteed. To refuse was to risk losing him, perhaps forever. To a world where promises could vanish like smoke over the prairie, the Apache took a step closer. Boots crunching against the gravel and grit, his expression softened, but the tension in his shoulders remained. A subtle reminder that love in these parts was never safe, and every connection came with a price. He had seen too much, lost too many to think otherwise. Yet in that moment, facing her, he allowed himself a flicker of hope, the kind that could only exist in the wild, where every sunrise brought the possibility of redemption or ruin. She shifted, her fingers brushing the worn leather strap of a satchel slung over her shoulder. Inside were papers, letters, perhaps even secrets that belonged to a life she thought she had left behind. He knew, even without seeing them, that her past had claws sharp enough to tear apart the fragile trust they had been building since their first encounter. But he did not flinch. He never had. That was the way of the Apache, the way of men who carried the land on their backs and fire in their hearts around them. The canyon seemed to listen. The wind curled through the rocks, the shadows of jagged peaks shifting with an almost sentient patience. Birds wheeled high above, their calls slicing the stillness. Warning or welcoming it was hard to say. Time felt suspended in those moments, the kind of pause that could stretch into an eternity, where the next choice might decide everything. She swallowed, the taste of dust and metal and uncertainty filling her mouth. Her heart thumped like a drumbeat, unsteady but defiant. Every instinct screamed caution, every memory tugged her backward toward safer paths. Yet here she was, drawn into a tension that was electric and terrifying. A life of predictability had vanished the moment she had crossed into this rugged, untamed land. And now she was standing at a precipice, where her voice could alter the course of more than just her own destiny. The Apache watched her closely, the fire in his eyes softening only for a heartbeat before returning, relentless and steady. His people had taught him patience, strategy, and the art of reading both land and human soul. And in her hesitation, he saw the reflection of all the dangers she might face, all the trials that could come from saying yes or no. Yet despite the looming threat, despite the uncertainty, he stood firm, not out of stubbornness, but because some things in life demanded courage beyond logic, beyond fear. A crow's caw broke the fragile quiet, startling them both. Somewhere off in the distance, The faint rumble of wagons and men echoed against the canyon walls, a reminder that the outside world was pressing closer, full of its own dangers. The Apache's jaw tightened. Every step toward her, every whispered word was a gamble. If the wrong people discovered her choice, if alliances shifted, or grudges ignited, the consequences could be fatal. And yet, even knowing all this, he could not turn away. Not now, not ever. Her hand trembled, fingers brushing against the coarse fabric of her dress, then back to her side, reluctant and uncertain. The wind caught a stray lock of hair, and for a fleeting second, he almost reached out to brush it away, to close the distance between them in some unspoken assurance. But he waited, knowing that the smallest gesture could either break or bind. "Every moment counts now," he said finally, his voice barely louder than the wind. "Every word you speak changes what we are, and what we might become." The words were not a threat. They were a truth carved from the life he knew, from the unforgiving land that had shaped him, from the fragile hope that still lingered inside his chest. Her choice whether to trust him or turn away was not only about love, it was about survival, loyalty, and the unseen consequences that could ripple across a life already marked by hardship and conflict. She looked down at the ground, the sand and gravel shifting beneath her feet as if the earth itself were waiting for her decision. Somewhere deep inside, a fire stirred, both fear and desire intertwined, reminding her that some things were never simple. Love in the wild lands of the West was never simple, and saying yes might bind her to a man who could be everything she longed for, or cost them both more than they could bear. The Apache waited, his gaze unwavering, a silent promise echoing in the spaces between the rocks and wind. Time seemed to hang by a thread, and in that stillness, the world outside the canyon ceased to exist. Only the choice remained, raw and urgent, pulling them toward a future that could either be beautiful or deadly. And then, as if the earth itself had decided to intervene, a distant shout carried across the canyon, sharp and sudden, breaking the fragile quiet. Horses whinnied, hooves clattering against rock, and a shadow fell over the horizon men, moving fast and clearly with intent. The Apache's eyes narrowed, hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt. She looked up at him, fear and determination flickering across her face. "Now," he whispered, the weight of every unspoken word heavy between them. "Now your choice matters more than ever." And with that, the wind shifted, the canyon seemed to hold its breath. And the first real test of their bond and of survival is about to begin. The sound of approaching hooves rattled through the canyon, echoing off the jagged walls like a warning drum. The Apache shifted slightly, keeping his body low, eyes scanning for the source. The men were far enough to give him a moment, but close enough that hesitation could be deadly. Dust kicked up in swirling clouds ahead, and he could make out the faint shapes of figures moving with purpose. Whatever they wanted, it was no friendly visit. She stayed close, her breathing uneven, but steadying with effort. Her eyes darted between the Apache and the distant shadows, trying to make sense of the danger. She had seen the signs of trouble before, in towns where lawmen and outlaws danced a thin line between order and chaos. But this felt different. Here, in the middle of the canyon, there were no deputies, no fences, no rules to protect anyone. Only the land and those who knew how to claim it. He lowered his voice, speaking barely above a whisper. "They've been following me for days. I thought I lost them on the plains, but they must have tracked our trail through the riverbed. Whoever they aren't looking for talk, they're looking for blood." She swallowed hard. Her hand brushed the satchel at her side, feeling the weight of the papers and letters inside, the remnants of a life she had hoped to leave behind. They were dangerous, though she hadn't fully realized it until now. She had assumed the past could stay buried with her footsteps. But the echoes of what had been left behind had a way of catching up. "They know something about you," she said cautiously, her voice shaky but defiant. "Something that makes them dangerous." He nodded, eyes narrowing toward the dust cloud that grew more distinct with every second. "It's more than that. It's about everything I've worked for. Every step I've taken to survive, to protect my people. They want it all. And now they think you might lead them to it." Her stomach tightened. She had crossed paths with trouble before, but this was different. She wasn't just an observer or a passenger. She was a part of the danger now, entwined with a man whose world was harsher, sharper, and more unforgiving than anything she had ever known. Her choice whether to say yes or to turn away wasn't just about a promise. It could put them both in the path of men who had no mercy. The Apache adjusted the knife at his belt and gave her a small, reassuring nod. We need to move, and we need to do it quietly. There's a hidden path along the ridge, just over the bend. It's risky, but it's the only chance we have to stay out of their line of sight. She nodded, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. Each movement felt deliberate now, measured against the knowledge that one wrong step could cost them everything. She followed him as he led the way through a narrow crevice, the canyon walls rising high on either side like ancient guardians. The dust from the approaching riders settled into the shadows behind them, a constant reminder of the peril that trailed every footstep as they moved. The Apache spoke quietly, his voice low and steady. You need to understand who I am if you're going to make the choice I asked of you. My people, we've lived in these lands for generations. We know the rivers, the canyons, the plains. We know how to survive when others can't. And sometimes, survival means making decisions that feel impossible. She listened, captivated despite the tension. He didn't speak boastfully, nor did he try to impress. His words were simple, honest, and heavy with the weight of experience. She realized that the man who had whispered for her to claim him was not just a figure of intensity and danger. He was a man forged by hardship, by loss, by battles both with the land and with the men who sought to take what was his. And yet, she said softly, her voice nearly lost in the canyon wind, you want me to make a choice? A promise. When the world you live in, it's already so complicated, so dangerous. He glanced back at her, eyes serious, unwavering. Because some things are worth the risk, he said. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the cost is high. I didn't ask lightly. I don't ask often. But I can't ignore what I feel, and I can't deny the possibility that you could stand with me. That's why I said what I did. They moved carefully, stepping over loose stones and ducking under low-hanging rocks. The Apache paused at intervals to listen, to feel the vibration of the ground beneath them, to gauge the distance of the riders behind. Each pause brought a tense silence, the kind that sharpened awareness. That made the world around them feel alive and dangerous all at once. She thought about her past, about the life she had been trying to escape. Small towns with their gossip and judgment, letters that carried secrets she wasn't sure anyone should know, and the constant pull of obligations that seemed to grow heavier with every passing day. And now, she realized, she wasn't running from the past anymore. The past had found her, and it was intertwined with the man walking just ahead of her, a man whose presence was both comfort and warning. Why me? She asked suddenly, her voice tight with curiosity and fear. Why did you ask me to say it? Why make me part of this? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowed, letting the wind brush against his face as if listening for something beyond sight. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. Because I've learned that some things in life are rare. Trust is rare. Loyalty is rare. And the heart. The heart doesn't always give itself freely. If I'm asking you, it's because I see something in you that can stand with me, that can survive alongside me. But it's your choice. Always your choice. They rounded a bend and the canyon opened into a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face. It wasn't more than a few feet wide in some places, and one misstep would send them tumbling into the rocky gorge below. He motioned for her to move first. Trusting her instincts and steadying her with subtle gestures, she moved slowly, her pulse quickening with every step. The Apache followed closely, knife ready, senses alert to any sign of threat. They were exposed here, every movement visible to anyone who might be watching from the ridge above. She tried to focus, to think only of the path ahead, but the memory of his whispered words and the tension in his gaze made her heart pound for other reasons too. From behind, the sound of shouts grew closer. The dust cloud had thickened. Now she could make out the figures more clearly. men on horseback, moving with precision as if they had tracked the Apaches every step. Guns glinted in the morning sun, and she felt the first real pang of fear. Sharp and immediate, cutting through the canyon like a knife. He glanced back once, eyes narrowing. Stay close. Don't make a sound. Her hand instinctively moved to her satchel, wondering if it contained more than just papers, if it carried secrets that could change everything. She realized then that her presence here, beside him, was not only a choice of the heart, but a choice that could alter the course of life and death in ways she didn't yet understand. The Apache's voice cut softly through the wind. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, you will need to trust me. That's all I can ask. I've survived this long because I've trusted my instincts, my people, and the land. Now, I'm asking you to trust me. The ledge narrowed further, forcing them to move single file. She followed him carefully, her boots scraping against the rough stone. Every sound seemed amplified, the scrape of leather, the whisper of wind, the distant clatter of hooves. It felt as though the canyon itself was holding its breath, watching, waiting. Then, just as they reached a small alcove hidden from view, the Apache paused, crouched low, and motioned for her to stay silent. From this vantage point, they could see the riders below, moving with deliberate purpose. Their faces were shadowed by wide-brimmed hats, their intentions hidden behind sun-bleached masks and determined eyes. Whoever they were, they knew what they were after, and nothing would stop them until they had it. The Apache's eyes flicked to her, and she understood without words. Her choice, the words she could speak, the trust she could give, was no longer abstract. It had become a matter of survival, and yet, even in the face of this looming threat, there was something undeniable in the air. Something that spoke of connection, of loyalty, of a bond forged in the harsh, unrelenting land they both called home. The wind carried a faint cry from below, and her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed to flee, to hide, to turn away, but she did not. She stayed beside him, her eyes locked on his, her hands clenched around the satchel at her side, and in that moment, she understood that whatever came next would not only test her courage, it would define it, and in the canyon. As the shadows of the riders grew closer, the Apache whispered once more. Almost to himself, almost to her, the choice is yours, but the cost may be higher than either of us can bear. The canyon seemed alive with anticipation, each gust of wind stirring dust and whispers alike. From their hidden alcove, the Apache and the woman watched the riders below, their shapes moving like shadows over sun-baked stone. The men were organized, careful, and unrelenting. Every step they took seemed designed to flush them out, to trap them against the cliffs where escape would be impossible. He crouched low, motioning for her to stay silent and out of sight. "They're not ordinary outlaws," he murmured, his gaze sharp, calculating. "These men, they've been hired, and someone wants what I carry or what they think I carry. And now, they might think you're part of it." She swallowed hard, the weight of the satchel pressing against her side like a tangible burden. The letters and papers inside were more than just remnants of her old life. They were proof of deals and secrets she hadn't even fully understood until now. Secrets that, if revealed, could tip the balance in ways she couldn't predict. Her choices, once private, had now made her a target. "I didn't know," she began, her voice trembling but quiet enough to be lost in the wind. "I didn't realize it would come to this," shook his head, not impatiently, but with the kind of solemn understanding that comes from years of knowing danger doesn't wait for innocence. You can't run from it anymore. Not when it's in your hands, too. From below, the riders paused at a narrow ridge, scanning the canyon walls as if sensing the hidden presence above them. One of them dismounted, crouching low to examine the ground. Tracks fresh footprints in the sand. The Apache's eyes followed them, noting every detail. Every subtle shift in posture and movement. "They've been following the wrong trail," he whispered, almost to himself, though his eyes never left the riders. Or maybe they've been waiting for the right moment to strike. The woman shivered, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity and some stubborn thread of loyalty kept her beside him. There was something in his steadfastness. Something in the way he navigated danger with quiet confidence. That pulled her closer even as fear threatened to drive her away as they watched. A ripple of movement caught her attention on the far side of the canyon. A lone figure emerged, mounted on a horse that moved with surprising silence for its size. The rider paused on a ridge, scanning the canyon below before tipping the head slightly, as if acknowledging the riders chasing them. The Apache's eyes narrowed, and he pressed a finger to her lips. "That's a scout," he said quietly. "He's part of the group, but he's also watching for someone else. Someone higher up? Whoever hired these men isn't acting alone." The weight of his words pressed on her chest. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, reaching beyond a simple pursuit. She realized that their struggle wasn't just for survival in the canyon, it was part of a larger game. A network of power and vengeance stretching across towns, plains, and rivers she had barely seen. Suddenly, a shout echoed from the ridge below, sharp and commanding. The riders spurred their horses forward, and the sound of hoofbeats rolled up the canyon walls like distant thunder. The Apache grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the shadow of the alcove. Dust and grit whipped around them, stinging their eyes. But he didn't hesitate. "They're moving faster than I thought," he muttered, scanning the narrow paths above. "If we stay here, they'll catch us before nightfall. We'll have to take the cliff route, even if it's dangerous. It's our only chance." Her heart pounded, fear and adrenaline mixing into a strange, sharp clarity. She followed him, trusting instinct, and the unspoken bond forming between them. The cliff path was narrow, the rocks slick from decades of wind and occasional rain. Every step required balance, focus, and courage, and she felt her muscles tense with the effort. Behind them, the riders pressed on, their intentions clear, their determination palpable. As they climbed, the Apache spoke again, softer this time, almost as a confession. "I've lost people before. Friends, family. I've learned to survive, but survival often comes at a cost. Sometimes the cost isn't blood, it's trust, it's heart. It's the chance to be human in a world that doesn't forgive weakness." She glanced at him, seeing for the first time not just the hardened warrior, but the man beneath the exterior. A man shaped by land, conflict, and loss, carrying scars that went far deeper than skin. She realized that saying yes or refusing wasn't the only choice that mattered. Understanding him, standing beside him, was part of the risk, part of the journey. They rounded another bend, and the canyon opened into a small plateau, overlooking a dry riverbed. The horses and riders below were visible now, coordinated force moving with precision, and she felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. There was no turning back. Every footstep now carried consequences she could not yet fully measure. The Apache crouched beside her, pointing silently toward a narrow crevice in the rock. "That's our exit. From there, the land favors those who know it. I've survived through paths like this before, but it's risky. One mistake, and..." He let the words hang, unspoken but heavy with meaning. Her eyes followed his gesture. The crevice was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze through, and it sloped sharply downward toward a hidden canyon that promised both cover and danger. She nodded, understanding the gravity of each step, each decision. They began to move one at a time, careful not to make noise. The cliff crumbled beneath their weight at intervals, sending small stones clattering down to the dry riverbed far below. Each sound, each echo, carried the possibility of discovery. Yet the Apache never faltered. His movements were precise, fluid, almost like the land itself moved with him rather than against him as they descended. The wind shifted, carrying voices from the riverbed below. The riders were close, and one of them called out, sharp and commanding, in a language that made her stomach twist. "Spread out. They can't be far. Don't let them slip away." The Apache's eyes flashed with determination. "We have to move faster. Keep low and don't draw attention. Trust me. That's all you can do right now." Her hand brushed the satchel again, the papers inside feeling heavier with every passing moment. The letters she had carried so carefully now seemed like dangerous fire, capable of igniting conflicts she hadn't fully understood. She realized that her involvement was no longer optional. Every step she took beside him bound her more closely to a path she could not escape, a story that had begun long before she arrived in this canyon. The crevice opened into a narrow gorge, the walls rising high on either side, cutting off sight from the riders below. For a moment the wind died down, and the world felt suspended. The Apache crouched, scanning for further threats, his hand brushing over a small pouch at his belt. "There's more at stake here than what you can see. They're not just after me. They want something hidden in the plains, something tied to my people. And if they find it, we could lose everything." She realized the truth of his words before he finished. Their struggle wasn't only for survival in this canyon, or even for her own choice. It was for something much larger, something that stretched across the land. Through towns and rivers and secret paths only he knew, and she, by standing with him, had become part of it. The sound of distant gunfire echoed faintly, a reminder that the riders were persistent, ruthless, and closing in. She gritted her teeth, fighting the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. This was no longer a test of courage alone. It was a test of loyalty, of judgment, of every instinct she had sharpened over years of navigating a world that often demanded impossible decisions. He glanced at her briefly, his eyes unreadable but steady. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we survive together, or we don't survive at all. There's no other way." She nodded, gripping the satchel tighter. Every instinct told her to flee, to run, and leave the danger behind. Yet something deeper held her in place, something tied to the man beside her, to the trust forming in the narrow spaces of this canyon, and to the unspoken promise that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The canyon seemed to stretch endlessly before them, shadows and light shifting as the sun climbed higher. Somewhere below, the riders regrouped, their figures moving like determined predators, unaware of the narrow gorge that now shielded their quarry. The Apache led her forward, each step deliberate, every breath measured, every heartbeat echoing the tension of a world on the brink of change. Confrontation. And as they pressed deeper into the hidden paths, both of them understood that the choice whispered in the morning light, "Say you are mine," was no longer just a promise of hearts. It was a commitment to survival, to trust, and to facing the storm together. And the storm, they knew, was only just beginning. The gorge seemed endless, twisting and turning with a cruel unpredictability. Every shadow, every jutting rock, felt like it could conceal a threat. The Apache moved ahead with silent assurance, each step deliberate. His senses alert to every sound, the whisper of wind, the scrape of loose stone, the faint murmur of distant voices below. She followed close behind, heart hammering, her hands gripping the satchel like it could anchor her in this whirlwind of danger. "They're getting closer," he muttered, his voice low and controlled. "I can hear their horses on the rock, the echo of hooves. They're organized, but they're not trained for terrain like this. That's our only advantage, if we use it right." Her breath caught as the faint echo of a shout carried from below, sharp and commanding. The riders were splitting up, trying to cover multiple exits, hoping to flush them out. The canyon amplified every sound, turning distant voices into an overwhelming roar that pressed against her ears. She looked at him, searching for reassurance, and found none, but the resolve in his dark eyes steadied her more than any words could. "They'll try to corner us," he continued, whispering as he surveyed the rocky terrain ahead. "We'll have to move quickly and carefully. One mistake, one misstep, and it's over." She felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Every step she had taken beside him, every choice to trust him, now bore the possibility of ultimate consequence. Her past, once a distant shadow, had caught up to her here, entwined with the Apache's struggle against forces she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Every paper in her satchel, every secret she had carried, could become a weapon or a target. A sudden movement in the shadows above caught her eye. A bird-a-hawk, large and silent, wheeled across the canyon, and for a heartbeat, she felt an eerie sense of foreboding, as though the land itself was signaling danger. The Apache paused, crouching behind a jagged rock, and motioned for her to do the same. "They're watching," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the ridge above. "We can't assume anything is safe. Not the path, not the rocks, not even the wind. Everything could give us away." The sound of hooves grew louder, faster, echoing against the walls with relentless persistence. The riders were determined, closing in from both ends of the canyon. She felt the tension coil around her like steel bands, tight and inescapable. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, yet she remained rooted beside him. Unwilling to let fear dictate her choices. "They'll try to split us," he said, reading the movements of the riders below like a map. "If that happens, don't hesitate. Move toward the ledges, toward the shadows. Don't look back. Just trust me to cover you." Her hand brushed against the satchel again, the papers inside a tangible reminder that the danger wasn't only physical. She realized that the men below weren't after him alone, they were after the secrets he carried. The hidden paths of power and loyalty that intersected with her own past in ways she hadn't yet understood. Her choice, her allegiance, had consequences that extended beyond the canyon, beyond survival itself. A sudden shout rang out from below, closer this time, sharper, more commanding. The riders were converging, spreading out in calculated precision, a net slowly tightening around them. The Apache's jaw tightened, and his hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt. "We have to move," he whispered, voice tight with controlled urgency. Now, they advanced cautiously, stepping over loose stones, ducking under jagged rocks. Each movement a careful balance between speed and stealth. The canyon seemed to shrink with every step, walls closing in, the sound of pursuit growing more distinct. Her pulse thundered in her ears, the adrenaline making her hands sweat and her legs ache, yet she pressed forward. Unwilling to falter, suddenly a shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls with a deafening crack. Dust and small pebbles exploded around them, and she stumbled, almost losing her balance. The Apache's hand shot out, steadying her, eyes scanning the area for the source. "They've found us," he muttered under his breath, teeth clenched. "We're running out of time." Her stomach twisted with fear, but also something sharper resolve. She had chosen to be here beside him, and now she could not turn back. Every step forward was a declaration of courage, of loyalty, of a bond forged in the heat of danger. The path narrowed further, leading to a jagged overhang that sloped sharply toward a hidden ravine below. The Apache paused, scanning the canyon, calculating the risk. His eyes flicked toward her, and she saw the silent question in his gaze. Trust him to lead her through, or face the consequences alone? She nodded, gripping the satchel tightly, and followed him onto the overhang. The rock beneath their boots was slick with dust, every step a careful negotiation between gravity and precision. The riders below shouted again, their voices angry and frustrated, echoing like thunder against stone. "They're closing in fast," he said, voice low, almost to himself. "We have only one chance to stay ahead of them. Stick close and don't make a sound." They pressed forward, the canyon walls rising on either side, enclosing them in shadows. Every movement seemed amplified, every whisper of wind a signal of potential discovery. The tension pressed against her like a living thing, relentless, unyielding. She realized that the Apache had not only led her through physical danger but into the heart of a conflict that tested loyalty, courage, and the choices that defined a life in these unforgiving lands. From the ravine below, a shadow moved another rider, smaller, faster, weaving through rocks with unnatural skill. The Apache's eyes narrowed. "They've sent someone ahead, a scout, or worse. He's fast, but he won't see us if we stay low." Her pulse quickened. Every instinct told her to flee, yet she remained, anchored by the presence beside her, by the trust she had placed in a man who lived in a world where mistakes were fatal and every choice carried weight. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The echo rolled through the canyon, reverberating in a way that made her ears ring. The Apache ducked, pushing her down behind a jagged rock, his body shielding hers. "We're almost there," he said, voice steady, despite the tension. "But this next stretch, it's going to be the hardest. One slip, one misstep, and we'll pay for it." She nodded, forcing her fear into the background, focusing on the rhythm of his movements, on the silent signals he gave. She had learned to trust him in ways she hadn't thought possible, and now that trust would determine whether they survived this canyon alive, or whether it became their tomb. The cliff path ahead twisted sharply, narrowing until it was no more than a ledge overhanging the ravine. Below, the riders were reorganizing, clearly aware that their quarry was close, but unable to anticipate the narrow, treacherous paths that lay ahead. The Apache moved first, testing each step, his knife ready. Senses stretched to the limit. She followed, careful, deliberate, every movement measured. The weight of the satchel seemed heavier than before, pressing against her side with the gravity of the danger they faced. One misstep could send them tumbling into the jagged rocks below. And yet she pressed on, unwilling to retreat, unwilling to betray the silent promise forming between them. A sudden shout rang out behind them, closer than ever. Dust and small stones cascaded from the cliff, striking the ledge and echoing through the canyon like a warning. The riders had discovered part of their trail and were closing in fast. The Apache's eyes flicked to her, and she saw the determination, the calculation, the fierce need to survive that burned in his gaze. "This is it," he whispered. "After this, we face the storm. But we make it together or not at all." Her heart pounded, each beat echoing the tension in the canyon. She understood now that the choice whispered in the morning light, "Say, you are mine," was no longer a question of words alone. It was a choice of survival, of loyalty, and of facing a danger that stretched beyond the canyon, beyond the riders. Into a world neither of them had fully seen, they moved forward, stepping carefully onto the narrow ledge, the wind tugging at their clothes. The echo of pursuit growing louder, more insistent. The canyon seemed to close around them, a corridor of peril where every movement, every breath, every heartbeat mattered, and as they pressed on, inch by inch, the riders below regrouped, sending a new wave of men along a secondary path, cutting off escape. The Apache glanced back, eyes sharp, jaw tight. His hand brushed against the hilt of his knife, his senses alert, and she realized that the moment of confrontation of truth, danger, and choice was almost upon them. The wind whipped through the canyon, carrying dust, voices, and the electric tension of a storm that had been building since dawn. Every instinct, every decision, every ounce of courage they possessed would soon be tested. And as they moved forward, she knew that the coming moments would demand more than skill or instinct. They would demand trust, heart, and the courage to claim a choice that could change everything. The canyon held its breath. The wind had shifted again, carrying the dust of the canyon and the distant cries of the riders who had chased them relentlessly. The Apache and the woman stood at the edge of a narrow plateau, the final stretch of the gorge behind them. Every muscle in their bodies ached from the climb. Every breath was thick with exertion, and yet, in the quiet that followed the chaos, there was a fragile sense of relief. For a moment, the world felt suspended, and she allowed herself to glance at him fully, seeing not just the warrior who had led her through danger, but the man who had carried her trust and her fear with equal care. The riders below had slowed, some regrouping at the edge of the gorge, others dismounted, scanning for tracks. They were relentless. But the Apache had led them through a maze of hidden paths that only someone who knew the land intimately could navigate. Every turn, every shadow had been planned with survival in mind. Now, at last, the immediate danger seemed to have passed, though she knew it would not be the last challenge they faced. He turned to her, his expression softer now, but still edged with the intensity of the fight they had just endured. "You made it," he said simply, a statement heavier than any praise. It carried acknowledgement of fear faced, choices made, and the silent bond forged in moments when life could be taken with a single misstep. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. We survived," she whispered, the words almost a prayer. Her gaze shifted to the satchel, the letters inside a reminder of the world she had left behind and the secrets that had brought danger to their doorstep. But somehow, in the midst of all the chaos, she felt a quiet clarity. She understood now that the risks they had faced together were part of a larger story, one that demanded courage, trust, and the willingness to act even when the outcome was uncertain. He stepped closer, eyes meeting hers with an intensity that still made her pulse quicken. "What I asked you? Before all this," he said, voice low and deliberate, "was never just about words. It was about choice, about trusting someone with your life, your heart, even when the cost could be everything. And you did." A warmth spread through her chest, stronger than fear or adrenaline, a sense of connection she hadn't known she could feel. Her choice had not been easy. To say yes would have meant stepping fully into a world of danger, of loyalty, and of responsibility. But in the end, it was not just about survival, it was about standing together, about claiming a bond that had been tested in the harshest of ways. The canyon around them seemed to breathe with them, the wind shifting gently now, the sun breaking through the dust to illuminate the rugged walls in warm hues. She realized that in this wild, unforgiving land, survival was not only about knowing the paths, reading the terrain, or avoiding danger. It was about connection, about choosing who you trusted, and about the courage to face uncertainty together. He glanced toward the ridge where the riders had been, their forms now distant and scattered. "They won't give up easily," he said, "but they've lost the advantage. And we've gained something more important, the choice to stand together no matter what comes next." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words sink in. The immediate threat had passed, but the lessons of the canyon would linger. Every step they had taken had demanded trust, courage, and a willingness to face what was unknown. And in that crucible, she had discovered something about herself she hadn't realized before, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. The Apache turned fully toward her, his expression softening further. "I can't promise the world will be easy," he said quietly, "but I can promise that I'll stand with you, that whatever comes, we face it together." She met his gaze steadily, understanding now the weight of the promise. It was more than words, it was a commitment forged in danger, in choice, and in the unspoken understanding that some bonds are stronger than the storms they must endure. Then, "I'll stand with you," she said, voice steady, carrying the depth of the trust and courage she had found in herself. A silence fell between them, the canyon holding it like a witness. The wind stirred again, but it no longer carried the tension of pursuit. It was softer now, carrying instead the quiet triumph of survival, of decisions made, and of trust honored. The Apache allowed himself a brief exhale, a release of the tension that had held him taut since dawn. He had faced danger, guided her through the peril. And now, for the first time that day, he felt the fragile sense of hope settle over them both. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that stretched over the canyon floor. In that light, she saw the rugged beauty of the land in a new way, the way it shaped the people who lived in it, demanded courage, and rewarded those who understood its hidden paths. She realized that their story, while forged in danger, had also created a foundation for trust and connection that would endure far beyond the canyon. He gestured toward the path leading away from the gorge, a trail that wound toward safer lands. "We move forward," he said simply. "The canyon tested us, but it's only part of the journey. There's more to face, more to protect, and more to understand. But we face it as one." She adjusted the satchel, feeling the weight of her past balanced now against the strength of the present. The letters, the secrets, the dangers, they were no longer just burdens. They were part of the story that had led her here, to this moment of clarity and choice. And as she looked at him, standing tall and unwavering beside her, she understood that trust, loyalty, courage were far more powerful than fear or uncertainty. They moved together along the trail, each step measured, each glance carrying unspoken acknowledgement of what they had survived. The canyon behind them held the echoes of pursuit, danger, and tension. But it also held the memory of decisions made with heart and courage. And as they descended toward the plains, the sun catching the dust in golden light, she felt a sense of resolution settle over her fragile, but real, The Apache taught me something today, she said quietly, almost to herself. Not just how to survive, but how to trust, how to choose, and how to stand with someone, even when the cost could be everything. He glanced at her, a small, almost imperceptible smile breaking the stern line of his face. And you taught me, he replied, that trust is a choice, and courage. Courage is found in the moments we choose to face the impossible together. The canyon stretched behind them, shadows lingering, a reminder that the world was not without danger. But in that moment, they had claimed more than survival. They had claimed understanding, connection, and a shared strength that neither could have found alone. As they walked toward the horizon, the wind carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. The world seemed wider, fuller, alive with possibilities. The past had not been erased, and the dangers of the world would not vanish. But the choice they had made, the choice to stand together, had transformed the uncertainty into something tangible, something that could guide them through the challenges yet to come. And in that quiet, sunlit expanse of desert and canyon, she whispered softly, almost as a prayer, almost as a promise, I am yours. And together, we survive. He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon, the determination and relief blending in a rare moment of peace. Together, he said, voice carrying the weight of every danger faced and every choice honored. The wind swept through the canyon one last time, stirring dust, carrying the echoes of danger past and the quiet hope of the future. The riders had vanished from sight, but their shadow lingered as a reminder of the trials overcome. The Apache and the woman continued on the trail, side by side, knowing that the world beyond the canyon would test them further, but also knowing that the strength they had found in each other was a bond that could withstand the harshest challenges. And so the canyon receded behind them, a witness to their courage, their trust, and the choices that had defined not only the day, but the beginning of a life forged together in the rugged, unforgiving beauty of the land. They had survived. They had chosen, and the horizon stretched ahead, full of promise, danger, and the unbreakable bond of those who dared to face the storm together. Top of form.